It all started on a crisp autumn morning in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek. The sun peeked through the trees, casting golden rays over freshly trimmed lawns and neatly painted houses. Sarah Thompson, a 32-year-old graphic designer, stepped outside with her morning coffee in hand. She loved this time of day, the calm before the chaos when the world felt peaceful and predictable. But as she turned to lock her front door, something caught her eye. Her heart sank. There, splashed across the pristine white siding of her home, were bold red letters that screamed, "Rules matter." At first, Sarah thought it was some kind of prank. Maybe kids had wandered into the neighborhood late at night looking for trouble. Or perhaps someone had mistaken her house for another. But as she walked closer, her stomach churned. This wasn't random graffiti scribbled by bored teenagers. It was deliberate, calculated, personal. The words weren't just written carelessly, they were carefully aligned, each letter sharp and precise, as if whoever did this wanted to make sure their message came across loud and clear. The bright, red paint stood out like a slap in the face against the soft white walls of her home, her perfect, rule-abiding home. Sarah's hands trembled as she set her coffee mug down on the porch railing. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Who would do such a thing? And why her house? She prided herself on being one of the most responsible homeowners in the neighborhood. She followed every guideline laid out by the Homeowners Association, HOA, from keeping her lawn perfectly manicured to ensuring her trash bins were never left out past collection day. She even went above and beyond, decorating her porch with seasonal flowers and string lights during holidays to add charm to the cul-de-sac. This didn't make sense. Why would anyone target her? As Sarah stood there, staring at the ugly scar on her otherwise flawless property, questions swirled in her mind. Was this vandalism meant to send a message? If so, what was the message? And who could possibly harbor such resentment toward her? She glanced around the street, half expecting to see someone watching her reaction. But everything seemed eerily normal. Birds chirped in the distance, and the faint hum of a lawnmower drifted from somewhere down the block. The other houses looked untouched, their owners blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding next door. Her mind raced back to recent events. Had she upset anyone lately? Not that she could think of. Sure, she occasionally disagreed with neighbors about small things, where to park during parties or whether holiday decorations should stay up past January, but nothing serious enough to warrant this kind of retaliation. At least not until recently. Then it hit her. Karen Miller. Karen was the unofficial queen bee of the HOA, known for her obsessive enforcement of its rules. She patrolled the streets like a watchdog, armed with a clipboard and a sour expression. If your mailbox leaned slightly to the left, Karen would leave a note. If your curtains didn't match the approved color palette, you'd get an email. And heaven forbid you leave a car parked on the grass even for 5 minutes, or Karen would be knocking on your door faster than you could say Homeowners Association. Most people brushed off Karen's behavior as annoying but harmless. After all, she wasn't technically breaking any laws, she was just intense. But Sarah knew better. A few weeks ago, she'd clashed with Karen over a minor issue involving Christmas lights. Sarah had hung twinkling fairy lights along her roofline, only to receive a strongly worded letter from Karen accusing her of violating the HOA's lighting restrictions. According to Karen, the lights were too colorful and distracted from the uniform aesthetic of the neighborhood. Sarah had tried to reason with her, explaining that the lights were temporary and added festive cheer to the area, but Karen refused to budge. Their conversation ended with Karen storming off, muttering under her breath about how some people just don't care about rules. Could this be Karen's way of getting back at her? Spray painting her house in the dead of night seemed extreme, even for someone as controlling as Karen. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this act of vandalism was personal. Someone had gone out of their way to ruin her property, and they had used words that sounded suspiciously like something Karen would say. Determined to find answers, Sarah grabbed her phone and scrolled through the security app connected to the cameras she'd installed earlier that year. She hadn't expected to need them so soon, but now she was grateful for the extra layer of protection. As she pulled up the footage from the previous night, her heart pounded in anticipation. What would she see? Would the video reveal the culprit behind this cruel act? Little did she know, the truth would be far stranger and more infuriating than anything she could have imagined. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her, replaying the security footage from the night before. Her heart raced as she fast-forwarded through hours of empty darkness, waiting for something, anything, to appear on the screen. The clock ticked loudly in the background, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, just after midnight, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was hard to make out details at first. The person wore dark clothing, their face obscured by a hoodie pulled low over their head. They moved cautiously, sticking close to the bushes lining Sarah's driveway. For a moment, Sarah wondered if this was some random trespasser who had chosen her house by chance. But then the figure stopped directly in front of her home, reached into a bag and pulled out a can of spray paint. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. Every movement was calculated, almost ritualistic. The figure stepped back, examined their work and adjusted the alignment of the letters as if ensuring perfection. Whoever this was, they weren't rushing. They wanted Sarah to see what they had done and understand the message behind it. The video continued. Sarah leaned closer to the screen, squinting to identify the vandal. Something about the way they carried themselves seemed familiar. Their posture, the tilt of their head, it nagged at the edges of her memory. Then, just as the figure turned slightly toward the camera, Sarah froze. She recognized that walk, that stance, those shoes, Karen Miller. It couldn't be anyone else. The realization hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Karen, the same woman who prided herself on enforcing rules and maintaining order in the neighborhood, had broken into her yard in the middle of the night to deface her property. The irony was staggering. How could someone so obsessed with regulations and decorum stoop to such chaos? Sarah rewound the footage and watched it again, unable to believe what she was seeing. There was no mistaking it now. Karen's distinctive gait, the way she paused to glance over her shoulder nervously, it was all there in black and white. Well, technically green and gray, thanks to the grainy quality of the night vision camera. But the evidence was undeniable. For a moment Sarah felt paralyzed. What should she do? Confront Karen directly? Call the police? Share the video with the rest of the neighborhood? Each option came with its own set of complications. If she went straight to the authorities, Karen might deny everything or try to twist the story to paint herself as the victim. On the other hand, confronting Karen privately risked escalating the situation further. And sharing the footage publicly, well, that could turn ugly fast. But as Sarah sat there, staring at the damning images on her screen, another thought crept into her mind. Why? Why would Karen go to such lengths to target her? Sure, they'd clashed over those Christmas lights a few weeks ago, but was that really enough to justify this level of hostility? Sarah racked her brain, trying to piece together the puzzle. She remembered the HOA meeting where Karen had first raised the issue of the lights. At the time, Sarah hadn't thought much of it. Neighborhood disputes were common, especially when it came to aesthetic guidelines. People often got worked up over trivial things only to forget about them a week later. But looking back, Karen's reaction had been unusually intense. She hadn't just expressed disapproval. She'd acted as though Sarah's choice of decorations was a personal affront to her authority. And then there was the letter. Sarah retrieved the crumpled note from her junk drawer and read it again. It was formal, overly detailed, and laced, with passive-aggressive undertones. The current display does not adhere to the approved color scheme, Karen had written, citing specific clauses from the HOA handbook. This creates a visual distraction that detracts from the overall harmony of our community. At the time, Sarah had rolled her eyes and dismissed the complaint as typical Karen behavior. But now, rereading the words, she noticed something she hadn't before. The tone wasn't just critical. It was accusatory. Karen hadn't simply asked Sarah to remove the lights. She'd implied that Sarah didn't care about the neighborhood or its standards. As if leaving up Twinkling Fairy lights for an extra week made her a bad neighbor. Could that have been the tipping point? Had Karen taken Sarah's refusal to comply as a challenge to her power? Or was this part of a larger pattern? Sarah began to wonder how many other neighbors had crossed paths with Karen and lived to regret it. Maybe she wasn't the first person to feel the sting of Karen's wrath. To test her theory, Sarah decided to reach out to a few trusted neighbors. First, she called Lisa, who lived 2 doors down. Lisa was friendly and approachable, always quick with a smile or a wave. When Sarah explained what had happened, Lisa listened quietly before responding. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," Lisa said. "That's awful. But honestly, I'm not surprised. Karen's been like this for years. Remember when Tom accidentally parked his truck on the curb last summer? She sent him a certified letter saying he was jeopardizing property values. Can you believe that?" Sarah nodded, even though Lisa couldn't see her. "Yeah, I've heard stories, but I never thought she'd take things this far." "Well, maybe she finally snapped," Lisa suggested. "You know how some people are. They build these little kingdoms for themselves, and when someone steps out of line, they lose it completely." Next, Sarah texted Mark, another neighbor who lived across the street. He replied almost immediately. "Karen's always been a nightmare," he wrote. "Last year, she tried to get me fined because my mailbox was half an inch too tall. Half an inch. I had to bring in a contractor to measure it just to prove her wrong." The more Sarah talked to her neighbors, the clearer the picture became. Karen wasn't just a stickler for rules. She was a control freak with a vendetta against anyone who dared to defy her. Over the years, she'd alienated countless people with her nitpicking and bullying tactics. Most residents had learned to humor her or ignore her altogether. But Sarah had stood her ground. And now, it seemed, Karen had retaliated in the worst possible way. By the time Sarah finished her conversations, she felt a mixno of anger and disbelief. How could someone who claimed to care so much about the neighborhood resort to vandalism? Was this really about the Christmas lights? Or was it something deeper? Did Karen see Sarah as a threat to her authority? Or was this just the latest chapter in a long history of petty grievances and unresolved conflicts? Whatever the reason, one thing was certain. Sarah couldn't let this slide. She had proof of Karen's actions, and she intended to use it. But as she closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Exposing Karen's hypocrisy would come with consequences, both for Sarah and for the fragile social fabric of Willow Creek. Still, she reminded herself, sometimes the truth needed to come out no matter how uncomfortable it made everyone feel. Armed with the security footage, Sarah felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her: anger, frustration, and determination. She knew she had to confront Karen, but the thought of facing her made her stomach churn. Still, she couldn't let this slide. The evidence was too clear and the act itself was too personal. Taking a deep breath, Sarah decided to approach Karen directly. If nothing else, she owed it to herself and her vandalized home to get answers. The next morning, Sarah marched across the street to Karen's house. Karen's property was immaculate, as always. Every bush was trimmed to perfection, every flower bed arranged symmetrically. Even the welcome mat looked like it had been vacuumed. It was almost ironic how pristine everything appeared given what Sarah now knew about its owner. She rang the doorbell twice before Karen answered. Dressed in a pastel cardigan and slacks, Karen greeted her with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Sarah," she said, her tone polite but guarded. "What brings you here?" "Karen, we need to talk," Sarah said firmly, cutting straight to the point. She held up her phone, the paused frame of the security footage clearly visible on the screen. "This is footage from my security camera. I think you'll recognize yourself." Karen's expression flickered for just a moment. Surprise, guilt, but she quickly masked it with feigned confusion. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but I don't know what you're talking about. Is this some kind of joke?" "It's no joke," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the knot of tension in her chest. "This video shows you spray painting my house last night. You left those words, 'Rules matter,' on my siding. Does that sound familiar?" Karen blinked rapidly, her lips pressing into a thin line. For a split second, Sarah thought she might crack, admit to what she'd done and apologize. But, instead, Karen crossed her arms defensively and shook her head. That's absurd. You're accusing me of vandalism based on blurry footage? This could be anyone, Sarah. Maybe you should check your facts before making wild accusations. Sarah clenched her jaw, fighting the urge to shout. She tapped the screen, advancing the video frame by frame. It's not blurry, Karen. Look at the way you walk, look at your shoes, it's you. And let's not forget the fact that you've been obsessed with enforcing HOA rules lately. Isn't this exactly the kind of message you'd leave someone who doesn't follow them perfectly? Karen's face flushed red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, Sarah couldn't tell. You're twisting things, Karen snapped. Just because I care about our community doesn't mean I go around destroying people's property. That's ridiculous. Then explain this, Sarah shot back, thrusting the phone closer to Karen's face. Explain why you were sneaking around my yard in the middle of the night with a can of spray paint. Explain why the graffiti matches your handwriting style. Explain why you singled me out after our disagreement about the Christmas lights. For a brief moment, silence hung heavy between them. Karen opened her mouth as if to respond, then closed it again. Her eyes darted around nervously, avoiding Sarah's gaze. Finally, she let out an exasperated sigh. Fine. Let's say, hypothetically, that I did do it, which I'm not admitting to. What would you want me to say, Sarah? That I lost my temper? That I regret it? Because none of that changes the fact that you blatantly disregarded the rules. Sarah stared at her, stunned. Was Karen really trying to justify her actions by blaming her? Are you serious right now? Sarah asked incredulously. You broke into my yard, vandalized my house, and violated multiple laws, all because of some stupid argument about holiday decorations? Do you hear how insane that sounds? Karen's composure began to unravel. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses. It wasn't just about the lights, Sarah. It's about respect. You treat the rules like they're optional, like they don't matter. But they do. They keep this neighborhood looking beautiful, peaceful, and valuable. And when people like you ignore them, it affects everyone else. Sarah took a step back, shaking her head in disbelief. So you decided to punish me for having a difference of opinion? By ruining my property? That's not enforcing rules, Karen. That's harassment. That's criminal behavior. Karen's voice rose sharply, breaking through the calm suburban air. And what about you? Flaunting your disregard for authority, thinking you're above everyone else. I'm not above anyone, Sarah interrupted, her own voice rising to match Karen's. I followed the rules. I took the lights down when you asked me to. But apparently, that wasn't enough for you. You needed to teach me a lesson, didn't you? Well, congratulations, Karen. Mission accomplished. You've proven exactly how petty and vindictive you can be. Their shouting match drew the attention of nearby neighbors. A few curious heads peeked out of windows while others lingered on their porches, pretending to water plants or check their mail. The once quiet street buzzed with whispered speculation. Neither Sarah nor Karen seemed to notice or care as they continued their heated exchange. You have no idea what it's like to carry the weight of responsibility for this neighborhood, Karen yelled, pointing a finger at Sarah. Everyone looks to me to maintain order, to make sure things run smoothly, but all anyone does is complain or undermine me. And maybe that's because you're impossible to work with. Sarah shot back. No one elected you dictator of Willow Creek, Karen. The rest of us are perfectly capable of taking care of ourselves without your constant interference. The argument reached a fever pitch, each woman hurling accusations and counter-accusations. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with indignation, while Karen's face turned an alarming shade of crimson. It was only when Lisa, the neighbor 2 doors down, stepped onto her driveway and called out, Hey, okay, let's all calm down, that they finally paused. Lisa approached cautiously, holding up her hands in a gesture of peace. Look, I don't know what's going on here, but yelling at each other isn't going to solve anything. Can we please take a step back and figure this out like adults? Sarah exhaled slowly, realizing how worked up she'd become. As much as she wanted to hold Karen accountable, she knew continuing the confrontation in public wouldn't help her case. Turning to Lisa, she said, Karen vandalized my house last night. I have proof. She won't admit it, though. Lisa glanced at Karen, who was still fuming. Is that true, Karen? She asked gently. Of course not. Karen huffed, crossing her arms again. Sarah's twisting things to make me look bad. She's always been difficult. Lisa raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, she turned back to Sarah. Why don't you come over to my place? We can talk about this rationally and figure out the next steps. Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. She gave Karen one final glare before following Lisa to her house. As they walked away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Karen's refusal to take responsibility meant the battle was only beginning, but Sarah was ready. With irrefutable evidence in hand, she intended to expose Karen's hypocrisy and hold her accountable, for the sake of her home, her dignity, and the entire neighborhood. As she settled into Lisa's living room, Sarah realized something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. Karen's actions had revealed cracks in the foundation of Willow Creek's community spirit. If left unchecked, her behavior could poison relationships among neighbors and create lasting divisions. Whatever happened next, Sarah vowed to fight not just for justice, but for unity. The fallout from Sarah's confrontation with Karen rippled through Willow Creek, like a stone dropped into still water. Neighbors who had previously stayed on the sidelines found themselves drawn into the drama, forced to pick sides in what was quickly becoming the neighborhood's most talked-about scandal. Opinions were divided, and tensions simmered beneath the surface of polite smiles and casual conversations. On one side, there were those who sympathized with Sarah. They saw her as the victim, a hard-working homeowner targeted by someone who had let power go to her head. Lisa was among this group, along with Mark and a few others who had quietly endured Karen's nitpicking for years. It's about time someone stood up to her, Lisa said during a private chat with Sarah. If we don't address this now, she'll keep pushing boundaries until no one feels safe or respected. Others, however, weren't so quick to condemn Karen. Some neighbors believed Sarah must have provoked her somehow, even if unintentionally. After all, Karen had always been vocal about maintaining order, and while her methods could be abrasive, many felt she ultimately had the neighborhood's best interests at heart. I'm not saying what happened is okay, admitted Tom, the same neighbor who'd clashed with Karen over his truck last summer. But Sarah knows how particular Karen is about rules. Maybe she shouldn't have pushed back so hard. This division came to a head at the next HOA meeting, which turned into an impromptu tribunal rather than its usual mundane agenda-setting session. The room buzzed with nervous energy as residents filed in, some whispering behind cupped hands, others casting wary glances at both Sarah and Karen. Chairs scraped against the floor as people jockeyed for seats closer to the front, eager to witness the showdown firsthand. Karen arrived late, sweeping into the room with an air of wounded dignity. She carried her clipboard tightly under one arm, her jaw set in a firm line. Sarah followed shortly after, flanked by Lisa and Mark, whose presence served as both moral support and a subtle show of solidarity. The atmosphere grew tense as the two women locked eyes across the crowded space. The meeting began with routine updates, budget approvals, landscaping schedules, and holiday decoration guidelines. But it didn't take long for the real issue to come to the forefront. Mrs. Henderson, the HOA president, cleared her throat awkwardly before addressing the elephant in the room. We've all heard rumors about recent events involving two of our members. For the sake of transparency and to preserve harmony within our community, I think it's important we discuss this openly. Without hesitation, Karen stood up, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Her voice rang out clear and steady, though her knuckles whitened around the edges of the board. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I appreciate the opportunity to set the record straight. What has been alleged against me is nothing short of character assassination. Yes, Sarah claims I vandalized her property. But let me remind everyone that accusations are not facts. Without concrete evidence, these baseless attacks only serve to divide us further. Her words drew murmurs of agreement from certain corners of the room. A few heads nodded approvingly, while others exchanged skeptical looks. Sensing the tide shifting slightly in her favor, Karen pressed on. Let's also consider context here. Sarah has consistently challenged our community standards, whether it's ignoring approved color schemes or disregarding parking regulations. Is it any wonder that frustration might boil over? Sarah felt her cheeks flush with heat as whispers filled the room. This wasn't how she'd envisioned the conversation going. Taking a deep breath, she rose to her feet, clutching her phone tightly in her hand. With all due respect, Karen, frustration doesn't excuse breaking the law or violating someone's home. You can spin this however you want, but the truth is undeniable. With that, she connected her phone to the projector system and played the security footage for everyone to see. Gasps echoed through the room as the grainy video illuminated the screen. There was no mistaking the figure in the hoodie, no denying the deliberate movements as they defaced Sarah's house. Silence fell like a heavy curtain as the clip ended, leaving only the hum of the projector fan in its wake. For a moment, Karen looked as though she'd been struck. Her face paled, and her clipboard slipped slightly in her grasp. But true to form, she recovered quickly, straightening her posture and forcing a brittle smile. "This proves nothing," she declared, her voice rising above the stunned murmurs. "Anyone could have tampered with this footage. Anyone could have dressed up to look like me. Are we really going to convict someone based on circumstantial evidence?" Her defiance sparked another wave of debate. Some neighbors sided with Sarah, insisting the video spoke for itself. Others questioned its authenticity, echoing Karen's claims of potential manipulation. Voices grew louder, tempers flared, and soon the meeting descended into chaos. Chairs scraped backward as people stood to argue their points. Fingers pointed accusingly, and accusations flew like arrows. Amidst the commotion, Mrs. Henderson banged, her gavel repeatedly calling for order. "Enough," she finally shouted, her usually calm demeanor cracking under the pressure. "This behavior is unacceptable. We are adults and we will conduct ourselves accordingly. If anyone wishes to speak, they will do so respectfully and without interruption." The room quieted, albeit reluctantly. Sarah sank back into her seat, feeling drained yet determined. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Convincing the entire neighborhood of Karen's guilt would require more than just video footage. It would demand patience, persistence, and perhaps even legal intervention. But as she glanced around the room, catching the sympathetic nods of Lisa, Mark, and others who supported her cause, she realized she wasn't alone. As the meeting dragged on, attempts to resolve the conflict proved futile. No consensus emerged, and the divide between Karen's defenders and Sarah's allies only deepened. By the time Mrs. Henderson called an end to the discussion, exhaustion hung thick in the air. Neighbors filed out silently, avoiding eye contact with one another, each lost in their own thoughts. Later that evening, Sarah sat on her porch staring at the red graffiti that still marred her siding. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Karen refused to budge, clinging to denial and deflection. It was infuriating, but also telling. Sarah realized that exposing the truth wasn't just about holding Karen accountable. It was about dismantling the toxic dynamic she'd created within the neighborhood. Whether through mediation, arbitration, or court proceedings, Sarah vowed to see this through, not just for herself, but for the sake of Willow Creek's future. And, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cul-de-sac, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Change rarely came easily, but sometimes, standing up for what was right, even when it meant challenging authority, was the first step toward healing. The days following the explosive HOA meeting felt like living in a pressure cooker. Willow Creek, once known for its quiet charm and neighborly camaraderie, was now a powder keg of tension. Conversations at mailboxes were laced with awkward pauses. Walks around the block became strategic maneuvers to avoid crossing paths with certain neighbors. Even the local coffee shop buzzed with hushed whispers as residents debated whose side they should take, or whether taking sides was even necessary. For Sarah, the stress was unrelenting. She couldn't escape the feeling that eyes were on her everywhere she went. Some neighbors offered kind words or sympathetic nods, while others avoided her altogether, clearly uncomfortable with the drama unfolding in their midst. Meanwhile, Karen seemed determined to dig in her heels, doubling down on her denial despite the mounting evidence against her. Every interaction between them, whether direct or indirect, felt like another log thrown onto the fire. One morning, as Sarah watered her front garden, Karen appeared on her own porch across the street. Clad in her signature pastel cardigan and khakis, she stood stiffly clutching a stack of papers. "Good morning," she called out, her tone overly cheerful but forced. "I just wanted to drop off some information about recent updates to the HOA guidelines." Sarah froze, gripping the hose tightly. Was this Karen's way of asserting dominance? Or was she trying to prove that nothing, not even accusations of vandalism, could disrupt her role as the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer? Either way, Sarah wasn't interested in playing along. "Thanks, but I'm sure you can email those to everyone," she replied curtly, turning her back to continue watering. Karen hesitated, clearly flustered by the dismissal. "Well, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out," she said, before retreating inside. But Sarah noticed the way Karen lingered by her window afterward, peeking through the blinds as though waiting for a reaction. As the days passed, it became clear that Karen wasn't going to back down quietly. Instead, she launched a subtle campaign to sway public opinion in her favor. Flyers began appearing in mailboxes titled, "The Truth About Our Neighborhood Conflict." The documents painted Sarah as unreasonable and disruptive, accusing her of stirring up trouble for attention. "This isn't about rules or property values anymore," one flyer read. "It's about divisiveness and hostility being introduced into our peaceful community." At first, Sarah dismissed the flyers as harmless propaganda. But when similar messages started popping up in online forums and social media groups dedicated to Willow Creek, she realized Karen was serious. Her reputation and possibly her standing within the neighborhood was under attack. Determined not to let Karen control the narrative, Sarah decided to fight back. With Lisa and Mark's help, she created her own document titled, "What Really Happened? A Call for Accountability." It included screenshots of the security footage, timestamps, and a detailed account of events leading up to the vandalism. At the bottom, she added a simple plea. "We deserve transparency and fairness in our community. Let's work together to ensure justice is served." The response was immediate and polarizing. Some neighbors praised Sarah for her courage and honesty, thanking her for bringing the issue to light. Others accused her of stirring the pot further, claiming her counter-campaign only fueled division. One particularly heated exchange unfolded in an online group chat, where tempers flared and accusations flew back and forth. "You're making Karen out to be the villain here, but what about your behavior?" demanded a neighbor named Greg. "She's been running this place for years without complaints until you showed up and started causing problems." "That's ridiculous," Sarah shot back. "I've done nothing wrong except follow the same rules everyone else does. This isn't about me. It's about holding someone accountable for breaking the law. And who gets to decide what's fair?" countered another resident. "You're acting like you're above the system." Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. Engaging in these arguments felt exhausting, yet she knew staying silent would only give Karen more ammunition. Still, the toll it took on her mental health was undeniable. Sleepless nights became the norm, and even mundane tasks like grocery shopping felt like navigating a minefield. Amidst the chaos, Lisa suggested organizing a neutral gathering, a chance for neighbors to come together and discuss their concerns openly. "Not everyone wants to pick sides," she explained. "Some people just want answers. If we create a safe space for dialogue, maybe we can find common ground." Though skeptical, Sarah agreed to try. Together, they reserved the community center for a Sunday afternoon and sent out invitations to all residents. To keep things civil, they established ground rules: no interrupting, no personal attacks, and no recording devices allowed. The goal was simple: foster understanding and move toward resolution. On the day of the meeting, the turnout was surprisingly large. Chairs filled quickly with neighbors sitting shoulder to shoulder, some visibly nervous, others eager to speak. Mrs. Henderson opened the session by reminding everyone of the importance of respect and cooperation. Then she turned the floor over to Sarah and Karen. Sarah spoke first, presenting her case calmly and methodically. She shared the security footage again, highlighting key moments that left little room for doubt. She acknowledged the disagreement over the Christmas lights, but emphasized that such conflicts shouldn't escalate to criminal acts. "I don't hate Karen," she concluded. "I just want accountability, that's all." When it was Karen's turn, she remained defiant, but cracks began to show. Her voice wavered slightly as she reiterated her claims of innocence, insisting the footage could have been manipulated. However, instead of sticking solely to denial, she veered into emotional appeals. "I've devoted years of my life to this neighborhood," she said, her eyes glistening. "I've worked tirelessly to maintain standards because I care deeply about our community. If people see me as harsh or controlling, so be it. But I never intended to hurt anyone." Her words resonated with some attendees who nodded sympathetically. Others exchanged skeptical glances, unconvinced by her sudden vulnerability. As the discussion opened up to the floor, opinions poured forth in waves. Some supported Sarah's call for accountability, arguing that vandalism was unacceptable regardless of motive. Others expressed frustration with both parties, urging them to resolve their differences privately rather than airing dirty laundry in public. By the end of the meeting, no clear consensus had emerged. But something important had shifted: the conversation itself. For the first time since the incident, neighbors weren't just choosing sides. They were asking hard questions about trust, responsibility, and how to rebuild a fractured community. While far from resolved, the dialogue marked a small step toward healing. As Sarah walked home that evening, she felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. The road ahead remained fraught with challenges, but she took solace in knowing she hadn't fought alone. Change rarely happened overnight, especially in tight-knit communities like Willow Creek. Yet as she glanced at the graffiti still marking her house, she reminded herself why she'd started this journey in the first place. Not for revenge, but for truth, and for the hope of a better tomorrow.